So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Guy Adams. I'm CTO and co-founder of DataOps.live. And I'm joined by Keith and Paul today, who are going to introduce themselves. But we decided to do something a little bit different. You know, at a lot of these events, we come and people ask us, what's the right way to do this? What's the right way to do that? These are two of the most experienced practitioners in the fields of DataOps and data products you'll find anywhere in the world. And so we thought with that amount of experience and combined expertise, we'd focus on something a little bit different, rather than saying how we think things should be done and how things have been successful, busting some of the myths. DataOps and data products have been around long enough now that there are certain patterns that have become well established, and in particular certain myths that the three of us hear time and time and time again. And these are the guys that have actually been there, done that, and disproved those myths. So we've got 6 myths we'd like to go through today, but we've also got 3 of the most prolific talkers in the industry, so we may not get through all 6. We're going to try and do a lightning round, see how many of them we get through. But Keith, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Keith Belanager. I'm the Field CTO at DataOps.live, but prior to that, I was about 28 years as a practitioner in the data industry. Started with being trained by Kimball and then going on from there. So I have a lot of experience, and in the last 7 years, I've been a lot of focus on Snowflake, and currently also a recognized Snowflake data superhero. And I'm excited to be here, give you guys my thoughts on things.
Thanks, Keith. Paul Rankin. I'm currently a freelance data strategy consultant. I suppose my experience comes more modern from the data product experience. Was really at the epicenter when I worked at Roche, and I led the data mesh implementation at Roche about 6 years ago, directly with Zhamak Degani and the ThoughtWorks team. So.
Thanks, Paul. And in fact, that's a perfect introduction. If we jump to our first myth here, you mentioned data mesh. We could spend an hour on this topic alone. But the myth that in order to introduce and get value out of data products, you need to be doing data mesh. You're an acknowledged global practitioner in this. What are your thoughts?
Do that, Guy. Funny, we're going for, as you can see, a Mr. Men theme there, right? When I thought it was a great idea to tie it all together. And then I realized that Keith, coming from the US, had no clue what Mr. Men or who Mr. Men were. But anyway, we're going to go with it and see how it works. Guy, do you need to do data mesh to do data products? Obviously, the answer clearly is no. Data as a product is a principle of data mesh. If you're implementing more of a data fabric strategy, you would also use data products as a vehicle for that. However, most companies want the principles more than the name or the paradigm. So if you look at data mesh, the principles, clearly data as a product, which is absolutely key to delivering, the vehicle for the strategy. When you look at domain ownership, again, a lot of organizations want to move away from this monolithic type of implementation and team topologies. So when you mix, the team topology principles, from Matthew Skelton, for example, and Manuel Piaz, then that is a great combination to deliver data products, but with more of a domain-owned, cross-functional, streamlined team topology. So actually, the principles in data mesh can apply all over the place, not just to data mesh. And I would say that any organization wanting to do this, don't just say, we need data mesh. Look at the principles, actually, and focus on that.
And that's very much, for those in the software world, it's very much the same as Agile. Agile was never designed to be this dogmatic thing that you read the book and you followed religiously. It was, you read the book, you understood it, and then you decided which bits are relevant for you, which bits are relevant for your business, and you go with those.
Yeah.
Keith, what's your experience?
Yeah, so for the most part, I came from more of a centralized type of approaches, but we had many Agile teams that were kind of doing different domains, but it was a centralized structure. We had domain-based Agile teams, but we were very much doing a data product way of delivering and developing and building our solutions for our business. So, like you said, we had a lot of the, I guess you could say, the data mesh principle ideas, but we were in a centralized structure. We still had one vision of an architecture and not as much autonomy in that space, but we were definitely following the data product in a centralized structure. So, yeah.
Okay. So I think it's fair to say it doesn't matter whether you're doing data mesh or not. It doesn't matter whether you're centralized or decentralized. If you are taking a product management mindset, if you're focusing on the needs of and the requirements of your shareholders first and building to that, and you're tying it to business outcomes, kind of everything else is irrelevant. You can absolutely do and get the value of data products across the board.
Yes. You call it what you want.
Yeah.
Fred.
Yeah.
Okay. The next one, and I think this it's actually somewhat related to the data mesh. This particularly, you hear this from people in the centralized world. People have come maybe from your background, Keith, is like, whoa. You're saying I can just give 20 teams complete autonomy to go and do what they want? It'll be chaos. It'll be the Wild West. We'll never recover from it.
Yeah, I've lived this one quite a few times where organizations kind of go to that data mesh approach and don't really adopt the federated governance aspect of it, and they really do give full autonomy, and then they have that really complexity of like, well, how do I take the data products and the solutions that have been built by the different domains, and then next you know, oh, we used hashing for doing our surrogate keys. We did, sequence generators, and then why can't we join our data together? Or why are you using different metadata columns? Or even if you're doing a type 2 dimension, why are you using different types of expiration dates? If you don't have that certain level of governance, I like to call it the guardrails. You got to give autonomy within certain aspects of your data strategy, but at some point you have to have those guardrails where you have to have commonality so that, I used to say, you could put Humpty Dumpty back together again. If I want to take two data products from two different domains and I want to use them together, well, you have to make sure you have certain common governance that is federated across your organization so that you can have that ability to have freedom and autonomy with the right level of governance and structure.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And I think one of the mistakes people make is you're thinking giving autonomy to teams, somehow people infer from that they don't have to communicate anymore. Yeah. And the exact opposite is true. The more decentralized, the more autonomy you give people, the greater requirement there is to come together in communities of practice to agree some of this stuff. How, when it's all done centralized, there's a small number of people, they all do it the same way. When it's decentralized, having that community of practice where we come together and agree on how we're going to co-work and how we're going to interoperate these things is even more important. So with autonomy, requirements communication go up rather than down, which I think a lot of people get wrong.
Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, I'm just kind of, when you're saying that, I'm thinking I'm supporting a large telecom at the moment, and 2 years ago, they started their journey, and they tried to do this. Everybody do what you want, domain teams, you have full autonomy, right? And obviously, as you know, it kind of ended up in a bit of chaos, complete chaos. And then what they did is quite typical what many organizations do, is a complete knee-jerk reaction and say, okay, now we need to centralize everything again, right? And this is absolutely not what you should do, right? And it's because they didn't bake in the standards, right, and the governance in what they defined as a data product. And for me, this is absolutely the most important thing that you can do is define a data product standard. What you know and your organization sees as a data product. You define that, bake it in at the beginning, and you bake in it at the end, and absolutely anything in between can be a little bit flexible until you get there, yeah? But if you bake in those standards right from the off, then people can be autonomous, teams can be autonomous because they know exactly what they're trying to deliver. Yep.
And I think this is where the right platform comes in, because you mentioned the federated governance, you mentioned the guardrails, you mentioned the structure, like building that in centrally, having the set, because federation doesn't mean we don't have a central team defining the policies and the standards, but defining them and pushing them out as emails or Confluence pages or whatever, it doesn't really work. These things have got to be defined, and they've got in code, in configuration in one place, and then inherited everywhere. So teams out there building data products really kind of they can build at pace, not worrying about it, because they know that they'll automatically be flagged if they're stepping outside those guardrails that have been established.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. It doesn't have to be the Wild West, but you've got to have the right guardrails in place, you've got the right federated governance, and you've got to really stress the need for communication. Okay, this one we've all heard more times than we care to count. And coming from the software development world, this kind of makes me laugh because try and find a software engineering team that says, "Hey, we're just starting out. We're not ready for DevOps yet." Like in the software world, DevOps is what you do before you write your first line of code. Like, period. It's just a universally accepted truth. But in the data world, people seem to think that, like, hey, we've got to get some years of experience under our belt before we're ready to embark on this whole DataOps thing. And to me, it's kind of crazy. But Paul, what's your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my answer, and I think we talked about this a lot, is how do you expect to get mature, unless you're really living and breathing it? You can't say, well, wait another year and hopefully we become more mature. And people need to go through this journey. A lot of it is a mindset thing, and in the way that people view data and data as deliverables, data as business value, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of the organizations that I work with really focused on the change management, the softer side of things, to really get people embraced and really embedded into this whole transformation of not just looking at data as a data warehouse or a data set or a report or whatever, but really turning it on its head, and looking at it as a product, for example. Yeah, I mean, this is quite difficult to do, especially for a lot of people in the business who have always just given requirements to IT, and they have been, been given reports or whatever. So this whole maturity thing is a journey, that everybody needs to go through, the whole entire organization.
Yeah, I mean, I was on a project. It was with an insurance company, and we were on our modernization journey. And we started out with just a small team of us. We were, about 10 of us. And we made a very conscious effort from day one that we were going to bake in these DataOps best practices right from the beginning. And even though it was we were slow to get started, before we knew it, we were close to 150 people, a few years later. But it was great to walk around and hear the lingo and the language and the processes being used as an everyday norm that we had worked on when it was just 10 of us, right? And then I had worked on other projects where they didn't do that, and they were at 100 people, and they were trying to backtrack and implement these things, 2 years later, and it was just causing more chaos. So the recommendation, implement those processes. Even if you are just getting started, take the time to put those in place. You're never too immature to start on the right foot going forward. Yeah.
Thanks. And I think we've got a myth on it later on about DIY, but I think a lot of this comes from kind of a historical position when getting started with DataOps meant I've got to establish a team, we've got to go out and look at 15 different products, we've got to pick 6 of them, we've got to integrate them together, we've got to write all our own processes. When starting from scratch was very complicated and expensive in both in terms of money, then you could make a case for this. But when you can go and say, well, I want to benefit from the lessons of the likes of Roche and many others, and just land with a very well thought through process, with lots of experience behind it, with well structured software that kind of guides you through most of this. It really doesn't make sense. And the other point you mentioned, Keith, that I really like is if you go ahead without this, you think you're not going to have retrofitting later. Like every step you take down, you're acknowledging you're taking a step down really the wrong road.
Yep.
And at some point, you've got to pay the piper. At some point, you've got to come back and say, hey, we're going to have to go and all that stuff that we did in a bit of a ropey way, we're going to have to go back and redo that. And that's very. If you don't do that, then you've got enormous technical debt.
I used to say all the time, pay me now or really pay me later. Right?
100%. So this is kind of a related one. Establishing governance and standards is going to slow down delivery. It's no secret. Everybody in here is working for a data team that is under pressure from the business, that has got to deliver more than they have capacity to do, has got to deliver it faster, and the concept of saying, look, implementing any of this stuff, it's all great, it applies to other people, but I'm under too much pressure from the business. I've got to run fast.
Yeah, we talked about the federated governance, and I think even this is really talking about that step before is. I was a pretty hard-nosed architect in terms of we're not going to get going until we understand our standards. When I would look into a data solution, no matter which one you're looking at, and I could tell, and I could identify who the developer was by how the table was named, the metadata columns that were there, that person did this, that person did that. It was like, no, we establish how we're going to name things, what metadata columns we're going to have, how are you going to do a hash calculation, how are you going to, all of those things we have to define those standards. And to your point, not just putting it into Confluence or putting it into a Word document and putting it somewhere with, what are those standards going to be, and then how are we going to operationalize those standards and make sure our data engineers, don't have to think about it, but we can be very comfortable that those best practices and standards are going to be followed. One for, ease of use, for, compute costs, for performance. All of that comes into consideration when you're defining those best practices and standards. And it has to be done. You can't have that wild, wild west of every data engineer just building what they want and think it's all going to, work together. So, yeah.
Cool.
The second part that, yes, it's going to be too expensive for cross-functional teams.
You're not hearing it?
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Yes? No? Okay. Basically, on the second part that is too expensive, when we were at Roche and we started, we said, absolutely. So if we have to take all these architects and data engineers from our central team and now distribute them into all the domains, or the cross-functional teams, absolutely, it's going to be far too expensive. But we realized is that we actually don't need the skill set, the highly skilled data engineers and the architects that we have. If we bake in the standards and the governance within the data product, within the data platform, all we need is basically a scale of vanilla data coming from very skilled locations. And we can, if we bake in the standards within our journey, within our platform, within our data products, we actually don't need those highly skilled. And that's, that's something to think about, because initially this is what we thought, and absolutely not. It was the case that we saved a lot of money.
And I think that, that concept, as most organizations, as you do decentralize, you end up with that small team in the middle of, some real hardcore, DataOps engineers, some real hardcore information architects and things like that. But they become a force multiplier. It's like the software world. You have 3, 4, 5 DataOps engineers who are a force multiplier for 300 or 400 software engineers. Nobody can afford, a high-end information architect for an individual domain team. But if you do it right and you do the heavy hard work once, then you kind of inherit that and multiply that multiple times. I think one of the mistakes that people make here is that it's about people look at the cost you can identify. If you said, we've got to stop for, pick a number, 8 weeks, and we've got to set these principles down, and then everybody can move fast afterwards, say, well, if we just take those 8 weeks out of the program, we're 8 weeks better off. No. Everything after that is going to be 40% slower, but because you haven't identified it as a clearly named thing, people just assume that it comes free. It doesn't. It will bite you, and the ROI in doing this little bit of upfront work is actually, I would say it pays back in 6 months, 9 months, certainly no more than a year. You're going to be better off than if you hadn't done it.
And to me, this is what DataOps is. It's not just your CI/CD, it's not just your code commit or your data quality. It is accelerating your developer experience. And this is what will save you a lot of money in the long run, is where you can build in those components, those little jobs that can be reused over 100 cross-functional teams in every domain. This is the power of DataOps for me.
Yeah. And I think, Roche, you got to, 500 data products? I mean, can you imagine doing that without enormous amounts of reusability? You're just, cranking the handle and turning them out, multiple a day almost.
Exactly.
Okay, my personal pet peeve. I can build this myself. I don't need a platform to help me. Maybe I want to build this. Maybe it's going to be fun to build this. Or even people saying, hey, with a DataOps platform, what is my job now?
Yeah, I mean, I have done the DIY and the DataOps platform. I mean, when I did the DIY, it was mostly because I had no other option. Like, we were, like many organizations, we were making our journey to the cloud, and all of a sudden, the whole thing of infrastructure as code was kind of slapped on us, and to sit there and say, we have to deploy everything as infrastructure as code from the CISO and our CTO and everybody else like that. So we had to build, and I can remember we had gotten Snowflake and we had Snowflake there within a matter of a few seconds. Here's your URL. Then we spent 3 months DIY building the ability to the CI/CD. How are we going to test it? How are we going to orchestrate it? And though we had certain engineers who enjoyed it, they're like, "Oh, this is great! I get to be creative." The lost opportunity from a business perspective, we were being paid, our organization as a data team, to deliver data solutions. The business needed to use the data, not to build software solutions. So though from an engineering perspective, it's like, this is fun, we like doing this, that was 4 months of the business not getting any value out of their data. And on top of that, it was just to say, it was a good enough data ops solution, like just enough so that we could do this and do that, but it was a constant, we have to now adjust this, build this, do this, and the DIY, it just really slowed us down from being able to be data product folks and delivering value to our business partners and customers.
I think you raised a great point there. A lot of people see this as, okay, I'll put a spec together. I'll also mention this, how long it will take. First of all, it'll take 2 or 3 times longer than that. We all know that. But that's to build it. And then you've got to maintain this thing in steady state. And then you've got the fact that, look around the show, how fast is everything evolving? If you're limited to a platform you built yourself, every new technology, every new capability that you want to try out, I can't because it's going to take the team another month to add this. So the building is expensive, the maintaining is even more expensive, but the trying to keep up to date with an ecosystem that's vibrant is just, it's a full-time job for tens of people. I know because a lot of them work for me. So if my 30-person engineering team struggles to keep up with this, what chance does 2 or 3 people inside a customer's organization stand? I know, Paul, you've had some experience of people trying to build this themselves.
I think this is an organizational thing. Essentially when everybody's on this strategy and everybody's saying, okay, this is where we're going to bring in, a data ops methodology, and, we're going to now adopt, reusable build once components that can be reused across, every domain. Everybody needs to buy into this. And I feel when we were at Roche, this was still a little bit, people were not fully bought into it because every domain still had their solution architects, still had their data architects, and they were still wanting to do the job that they'd always done, for many years. But now their job should have been to solution data products, not solution architecture on how to build and maintain data products. And I think, this is a question that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and I have to say, from a product company perspective, my favorite discussions are with people that say, yeah, we decided to try and build this 18 months, 2 years ago, and then they come to us because they know that, they thought it was going to take 3 months, 18 months later, they're left with a very, very expensive, and often the person that's doing it is the new incoming, because the person that ran it before has been kicked out, because they didn't deliver anything for 18 months, someone new comes in and says they've inherited this pile of spaghetti, is it salvageable? And often the answer is no, it's not salvageable, we just, but you can be up and running in a week with a platform that's designed to do exactly that job. So I think the final thing that we had on here, and looking around the room and going around the event, we said it's a vibrant time. There's a lot going on. We talk about data ops, we talk about data products, we talk about federated governance. A lot of people are relatively new. I mean, we were adding up the number of years experience we have, and we stopped counting at 75 because it was getting embarrassing. But we acknowledge there's a lot of people that haven't been doing this as long as we have. This is pretty overwhelming stuff. It's pretty complicated stuff. What advice would you give to people that look at this and just say, I may understand all of this, I may agree with all the value, but this is just a scary thing?
I mean, it is. It can be overwhelming, and it's not just data ops or data products. Everything in your working environment can be overwhelming. But when you throw lots of new terminology into the mix, such as data ops, data products, computational governance, all that things. Absolutely. We talked about the confused data officer at the start. Even the people that are trying to deliver don't know what they're delivering anymore. When they're saying, now we're doing data mesh, now we're doing data products, now we're doing data ops. For me, there needs to be more change management that can alleviate this. It's all right, the IT department, coming in with some fancy ideas, some new strategies, some new tech, but absolutely every organization I work with, the change management side of things is completely overlooked.
Yeah. Yes, it can be overwhelming, and even as many years as I have, even now, I can barely keep up with the amount of information coming out. Really, the advice I would have is, you're not going to be an expert at all of this. You can't be an expert in all of this. Is find people who are experts in these different areas. Find solutions that are experts. Follow them. Be mentored by them. Reach out to them. Don't feel you have to take it on all yourself, because you just won't. And that's how I even had to a lot of stuff we're doing now is, when I started would be science fiction at that point, but it is you had to network and find those people to lean on to help get you through there. So.
And I think some of this is a maturity of industry perspective, because none of us are overwhelmed. If I asked anyone in this room to go away and build a petabyte scale cloud data platform, well, we'd all be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But we're not, because we say, well, we don't need to. Snowflake will take care of that for us, for example.
Right.
So, why is it? I think maybe because it's a relatively new area. Why does everybody worry about understanding every nuance of data ops and data products, as opposed to saying, you know what? If I want a cloud data platform that runs at petabyte scale, and I'll go to Snowflake, and if I want a data ops and data product platform, I go to DataOps.live, you don't have to understand it all.
Right.
We'll take care of all the stuff under the bonnet and let you just do the stuff that you need on top. And I think that's kind of a maturity of the industry thing that we're arriving at, that probably in 2 or 3 years, people will just accept that, there's going to be things that are happening under the bonnet I don't need to worry about, because the outcomes speak for themselves.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and I think so once people start understanding that DataOps is not just Git repository and a runner, then things might become a little bit easier.
Yep, 100%. So I think we actually managed, fantastic, gents, to keep it on track.
A few minutes early.
We've got a couple of minutes. I think what we might do is take questions at the booth. We're just outside here, booth M50. But what I would ask is, we've covered a few things, but what is the one thing that you would say to everybody in this room? Take away one thing from this session, and that's probably all anyone will do, is what's the one thing you would have them take away?
It's easy for me. It's a data product standard, right? Get yourself a YAML file, define your data product, that's your standard. That will make your life a whole lot easier. Everyone will know what your definition of a data product is in your organization.
Yeah, mine is similar, is if you have not established your strategy, your standards, and how you're going to do it, I would say take that time out, and as a group, whoever your leadership group is, your senior architects, whatever that might be, and establish what are those standards and how are you going to operate, because it's the only way you're going to be able to scale and do what you want. So if you've been going 100 miles an hour and it's a bit chaotic, we used to take these like sprints to just check our, take 2 weeks, take a 2-week sprint, and it's not going to kill you. But the benefit of establishing what we've talked about, those best practice standards, defining what your data product is going to be, is worth the weight in gold. So, yeah.
And I think to wrap up, I think mine would be, cut yourselves a break. You've got no matter what you do, you've got an absolute ton of work to do, a ton of complicated requirements in the business. They're only going to get worse. Don't spend that valuable brain cycle time worrying about the nitty-gritty of trying to design, build, maintain a DataOps or data product platform. Simply go, get one for free, buy one, get one for the Snowflake Marketplace, we're on the Snowflake Marketplace, but then spend your time using that to actually deliver business value. No one is paying you to go away and assemble solutions. People are paying you to deliver business value, and the infrastructure you need is there. You've just got to go and grab it. So with that, Paul, Keith, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll be at the booth if anyone has any questions.
Great.
Thanks.